Hi, and welcome to the first of 6 live panel discussions of this 24-hour event celebrating the impact of forest landscape restoration across the world. I'm your host and moderator for this discussion, Lola, and I'm a youth striker from the UK. This discussion is about youth action on restoration and climate, and we're going to be discussing the role of young people at the forefront of environmental and social justice movements across the world. We're going to explore the synergies between the youth climate movement and the Bond Challenge and forest landscape restoration. Our panelists are going to discuss why restoration is so important to them and discuss ways that we can tackle the climate crisis. So with me today, we have Salome, Honorine, and Felix. Salome is from the Sacred Keeper Sustainability Lab. Felix is from Plant for the Planet, and Honorine is the IUCN Regional Youth FLR Ambassador. So, first question for our panelists. The youth climate movement has obviously swept across the world. It's had an immense impact. And I wanted to ask if restoration of deforested and degraded land is a solution young people prioritize or should prioritize to tackle climate change as well as other environmental and social crises? And if so, why? Who wants to take that? Who wants to take the question?
I'd be happy to jump in.
Over
So
to
I
you.
planted my first tree when I was 9 years old, and the reason I chose, together with my friends back then, we chose to plant trees, what later became Plant for the Planet, back then, was for the very simple reason that we thought that tree planting was just the simplest thing that people that are relatively powerless can do. And of course, in the journey of Plant for the Planet, as we slowly change from a organization of 9 and 10-year-olds to now an organization where we still have a lot of 9 and 10-year-olds, but a lot of 20 to 25-year-olds as well, where we're now trying to do forest landscape restoration at a more serious scale. Over those years, we've learned that that is absolutely not true. That our hope that it's, that is such a wonderful, beautiful, easy solution is obviously not the case, and it might be one of the more, if not most complex parts of the solutions in addressing the climate crisis. So I'm incredibly passionate about it. I became incredibly passionate about forest landscape restoration in those years. So I'm gonna focus on it nonetheless because I think it's so important, but no longer because I think it's so easy and therefore so well matched for young activists.
Does anyone else want to jump in? I mean, I think that raises a really important point, if not, which is obviously it is really important that young people engage with restoration, even if it is a really difficult thing. But does anyone have any ideas on how young people can not just engage with tree planting itself, but also how they can actually exert political pressure to make it a more simple solution, how they can actually drive the implementation of forest landscape restoration? Does anyone have any ideas on that? Salome, maybe do you wanna take this one?
Sure. My first response thinking is forest restoration is really important because it's important for us to focus on future generations. We have the lowest amount of natural resources right now. So it's important for youth to focus on this movement because we need to create more sustainable ways to live. And I think with environmental work and forest restoration and forest work, it's really important to focus on healing in general. I think that restoring the environment is not only healing for the earth, but it's healing for youth and people who are doing that work as well. And it can be restorative in that way. So yes.
Honorine, how do you kind of feel about how youth movements can drive implementation of these sorts of solutions?
Thank you very much, Laura. So you're asking how we think that youth movements can drive the implementation. Implementations. I mean, that's about people. That's about people. That's about resources. That's about information. So running the implementation on the ground means involving both rural and urban population. So therefore, bringing them together in a movement to implement the restoration, the fighting against deforestation, the promotion of forest landscape restoration. I think that's the key to the success of the new decade that we're entering in.
Absolutely, and if I may, I'd like to add like one more small point to the end of this. To help address that question, in those last 3 years, the youth movement has become maybe the most powerful voice. The youth climate movement has become maybe the most powerful voice in climate activism in general. But I do feel that the youth climate movement and the forest landscape restoration movement are still quite separate. Even though there is quite a substantial youth involvement in forest landscape restoration, but somehow there's not sufficient overlap. And because of that, forest restoration isn't necessarily one of the key demands that are being discussed by those youth climate activists in a lot of cases. Which is not to say that their solutions that they are calling for aren't important. I think this movement is generally doing quite a good job in prioritizing their targets. But I think there's potential for us to convince our peers there to include forest landscape restoration as part of their main calls. But I think part of the problem is that a lot of these youth movements are quite national in the way they approach their activism, often focused on their national governments, what can be done in their countries. And I guess what's so important about our movement is that it is so dispersed, and a lot of the implementation actually has to happen in countries or in partnership with countries where this youth climate movement might not be as strong right now. And this global nature of forest landscape restoration, I think, is the challenge in making this happen.
Yeah, this actually leads on to one of the questions we received, which is about how can we get young people to be more engaged with forest landscape restoration, not just engaged with the climate movement generally, but also with forest landscape restoration in particular. And you touched on some kinds of approaches we can take to kind of deal with this, such as having more of an international outlook. But maybe there are other things we can think of as well. Solomon, do you have any kind of suggestions of what we can do to getting people more passionate about FLR?
Yes, I would like to echo the point that I made before. I think that prioritizing healing in this work is really important, especially right now in the time of coronavirus, when there has been a lot of grief, there have been a lot of passings. I think that when we work intentionally in the environment, it helps the environment, it helps the earth and the ecosystem, but it also helps us. So one thing that I've taken from Sacred Keepers and forest restoration specifically is the soil is healing, and that's also soul healing. So when we're growing and when we're planting, we're setting intentions and focusing on what we want to grow. And when we're weeding, we're doing the opposite. We're extracting and we're focusing on what we want to let go. So I think that's really important to bring in youth to the movement, is to emphasize healing and the importance of that.
Definitely, I think that's a really important focus. Felix, do you have any more contributions?
Sure. I think what a lot of the excitement in the youth movement is around right now is climate, of course, very legitimately, because it's an insanely important topic. Of course, what we are trying to do in forest landscape restoration is often, or is very clearly broader. Climate is one of our main concerns, but we also focus a lot of on biodiversity and also on the impact on local communities. And of course, this is insanely important. And I think often when outside groups come in, start talking about restoring forests, is they focus exclusively, or we sometimes focus, or we fear that the focus is exclusively on climate, and that leads to the detriment of biodiversity and the local communities, which often I think makes us as a movement afraid of being all that clear about the carbon implications of what we are calling for and what we want to do, because we're afraid that we're oversimplifying that in a negative way. But I think that is something where we, to a certain extent, have to overcome our fears, find ways we can connect with these climate movements, be very clear about the potential climate impacts of our work, while still emphasizing the dangers that come along with an oversimplification in that way, and the potential dangers to biodiversity if fully implemented.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think especially as the youth climate movement and the climate movement in general is trying to focus on more issues and take a more expansive and systemic approach, I think there really is a direction that maybe we can go in to kind of keep that focus on all the issues, not just on purely how much carbon is being extracted from the atmosphere at any one time. So I think that's a really important thing to focus on. Honorine, do you have any contributions in terms of how we can get young people to be more passionate about FLR?
My microphone was muted. I think if you talk to us about poverty reduction, yeah, if you talk to us about better lifestyle, better living, if you talk to us about economic opportunities that are in FRL, then I'm pretty sure that we'll be on the move. So if we really want to bring young people on board, then we have to have innovative approaches, not just exploiting young people's energy, but also investing in young people's energy. So let us talk poverty reduction. Let us talk about economic opportunities that can come from FRL. Let us talk about the sustainable development that comes from the well maintenance of the landscapes. Then I'm pretty sure young people will be happy to join this movement, this action of restoring the landscape.
Yeah, I think what really comes out in all your answers is the fact that we need to have a really expansive approach to FLR, not just seeing it as about specifically carbon, but also seeing it as a solution to so many social issues, and something which is really going to repair our entire environment, rather than just promoting it to current climate activists or young people who are interested in climate as simply as something which is only going to do with carbon emissions. And I think that's really, really important to highlight. Honorine, coming back to you, I think I'm interested in how these lessons about implementation and about FLR can be adapted to young people in less urban areas who may have limited or no internet connectivity, but are often the first to actually feel the impacts of environmental crises. How do you think we can reach those people with this message?
I will still echo what I said. I believe that we don't need internet connectivity to plant trees. Yeah, the only thing we need is people, information, and resources to acquire items that assist us in planting trees and fighting against land degradation and combating deforestation. So when we have the people, when we have the information, when we have the resources, then we are ready to move. yeah, we don't necessarily need internet connectivity. So what I would say is that if you're talking about redesigning the way we work with nature so that we can restore the future, as we have said, we need to invest in young people's movements. Yeah. So there are people that are supposed to reach out to people. Those are what we call the movement. And also there are people that will be reaching on, the ones that are staying in less urban areas. So if we need to keep this going and give more effective results outcomes, in this coming, in this new decade that we started, I think we need to invest and encourage these young movements that are rising or that have been always been there.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to you, Honoring, I think, have you seen any kind of experiences of how FLR has managed to do that, has managed to engage young people and help them, not just take from them, how it's managed to improve the lives of communities with all these things, with poverty reduction, with these kinds of other social benefits that it can have? Do you have any, personal experiences of how FLR can do that?
It's exactly what we are working on. FRL Youth Movement Rwanda, Youth FRL Movement Rwanda, with the support of IUCN. We're trying to see how we can invest in young people's ideas, innovations, and help in the implementation of those innovative ideas that they are going to bring on the table.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important work. Coming back to you, Felix, how does your organization, how does your organization do those things that Honoring was just talking about? How does it, get information and support to young people who are trying to plant for the planet, basically?
So Plan for the Planet does a couple of things across the world. One part of what we do is direct restoration work, which we mainly do on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, where we have a staff of about 100 people that plant on average 1 tree every 15 seconds. We have some level of youth involvement and in that project, but that's really not the main focus of what we're doing there. We're just actually trying to do our best at landscape restoration there. And we do this at smaller scales in a few other countries, but Mexico is really our main focus, or that Yucatan Peninsula. On top of that, a central part of what we do at Plant for the Planet is our youth activism work. And what we do there is we organize youth workshops all around the world, mainly targeted at kids between 10 and 14. And these workshops that we actually call academies at Plant for the Planet, to make them sound properly academic, always run for 1 full day, generally Saturdays. So people actually have the ability to participate. And they always start off with a presentation from another child about the same age, another 12, 13, 14-year-old, explaining to the participants what climate change is, why forests are so important in tackling climate change, and the other benefits from forests, and so on. And what's really important is that the speaker is about the same age as the participants. So the message comes across that, it's that I don't have to be, an adult to make an impact. But if this kid can speak and explain this to me, I can explain this to others. And after learning this, the participants play a few games to understand these issues better. Then they all practice giving presentations themselves, mainly to have that simple experience that it's really not that hard. And then, of course, we plant trees at all of these academies. And afterwards, all participants make plans in their school groups. Generally, we have about 80 participants from up to 20 different schools. And in those school groups, they then make plans what they want to do in their schools afterwards. which often includes things like giving a presentation in my class and then the neighboring class, and organizing a tree planting event, such things. And at the end of the day, they present their plans in front of all the other participants and the parents that are coming to pick them up as a sort of commitment of what I am going to do now. And then they organize themselves in these school groups, often in like little clubs, to then do what they set out, what they planned there. So globally, we've organized these academies, about 1,500 such academies in 74 countries so far. So we've had almost 100,000 children and youth that have participated in these academies. Of course, we really focus on having in-person events for most of Plant for the Planet's history, because that's obviously a totally different experience when you get to learn these things together with other people your age versus you know, being on a Zoom call essentially. But of course, this past year has forced us to abandon our ways, at least for now. And these academies are now participating internationally online, which also, of course, has the interesting benefit that you have this experience about learning the same thing with kids in totally different countries, which does add another really powerful experience as well. So this is a central part of what we do at Plant for the Planet to engage young people in tree planting and in nature conservation.
Yeah, one thing I found really interesting in what you just said was the fact that young people are, you know, teaching other young people and they're teaching their peers. And from what you said, it sounds like that's a really important part of what allows young people to engage in this process, right? Is not just feeling like they're being talked down to, but learning through teaching, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah, that's been at the center of how we organize these academies since the third academy we ever organized. Took us a bit of time, but we figured it out quite soon, actually.
Yeah, and I think I'm interested in how we can engage young people, you know, when there isn't this dimension of it being young person to young person, but when it's actually, you know, larger organizations, NGOs, kind of organizations that young people might be resistant to, or see as quite institutionalized. How can those types of organizations try to engage with young people and empower young people through their restoration work? Maybe if we start with Salome.
Sure. I was thinking large organizations and companies and corporations, I think they need to stay true to their own beliefs. So when their beliefs and their practices are in alignment, it's easier to attract the youth. So if they're saying that they want to be sustainable, hopefully they can remain sustainable in their practices, because a lot of times we see big corporations and governments working together and their policies are usually very harmful, and the youth notices that and we point that out. But if their policies and their practices are in alignment, there shouldn't be a problem recruiting youth.
Yeah, that consistency is really important. Honorine, do you have anything to contribute to this question?
Thank you, Laura. How big organizations can help engage and involve young people? I think I would still echo in what I said. We have ideas, we have the future that we want. You know, give us the time and we present it to you and you support us. You know, at the end of the day, we are the future generation. So if we are this future generation, give us time to give you to tell you what we want. Yeah, implement projects according to the future generation's needs. Thank you.
Yeah, really letting youth lead and doing youth-led work is a really good direction to go in. Felix, do you have anything to contribute?
Yeah, maybe like one little specific point that I've been thinking about a lot recently. A colleague of mine who's a PhD student here in Zurich was recently giving a talk invited to give a talk about landscape approaches at a conference. And these conference hosts have been super engaged in getting youth voices there. And when she spoke, she was announced as a youth voice, which of course she is, as a, I think, 29-year-old academic, but also, obviously identifies as an academic, and was, hoping to speak as that. And what she perceived there was that being introduced as a youth voice kind of took away from her credibility and her legitimacy as a legitimate person speaking there. Because of course, she is young, and that informs how she thinks about the world. But that isn't the only reason she should be invited and she should speak there. So that is to say, of course, I think it's fantastic that so many organizations and so many event hosts are making a real effort to invite youth speakers. But maybe that's not the best way to frame their participation. Maybe frame their participation in what they've achieved and what they've contributed. They are a youth voice, but that's not the only thing they are. Often their achievements are a lot more interesting than just their age.
Yeah, that's so important. Really recognizing people's expertise can go a long way to making people not feel like they're just tokens, essentially, or just there to be the young person in the room. So I think that's a really important point. So finally, since we're running out of time, can we have maybe a short perspective on how young people can lobby governments to make pledges on environment, on climate, and obviously on forest landscape restoration? So maybe if we start with, go back to Felix, this one.
Yeah, I'm actually quite unsure about how to give young people advice in this regard, because they've been extraordinarily effective, I think, at least in some European countries in recent years, to actually lobby their governments more than anyone else really involved in the climate or landscape movement more generally. But I think maybe a big part of our challenge in our movement so far, and this doesn't really pertain just to youth, but to us more generally, is having clearer demands what governments should do, especially governments in countries where they don't necessarily have that much forests to restore. I don't think we have a unified demand for the German government or the French government, for instance, what exactly they should be doing to help us restore forest landscapes. Don't think that's a youth specific point, but a generally important one.
Yeah. Honorine, do you want to go next?
Sure, no problem. I think I need also to highlight that restoring the landscapes, it's not just a task that we are accomplishing, but we are building a system that the future generations are going to enjoy. So commitment and consistency, and I think they are key to the success of the next decade of restoring, of achieving the 350 million hectares that we have pledged in the Bond Challenge by 2030. So if I can say what I have said even before, is that at the end of the day, this deforestation or climate change is a global threat, just like COVID-19. So if we're talking about COVID-19, there are countries that failed, and today we are seeing their shortcomings. So if we can maybe put together the energy, the way we are fighting COVID-19 is the way we can also fight climate change together. Thank you.
Yeah. And finally, just before we wrap up, Salome.
Yes, I absolutely agree with my colleagues. I think in the last couple of years, since 2016, I've seen a lot of youth come forward and speak out about what they are passionate about And I've seen a lot of people become more invested in protecting the environment and the earth. So I think that building community and encouraging others to join you and join your cause is really important and very crucial. And I've seen a lot of that in the past few years, which is very exciting.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great note to end on. The importance of community, and it's been really great. It has been really incredible to see. So unfortunately, that's all we have time for. But thank you so much to all our panelists for attending, and thank you to everyone who submitted questions for us to ask. That's all from me. Thank you so much, and I hope you continue to engage with the rest of the events today.